The biggest and most memorable of these concerts was on August 2nd at the Singer Bowl at the Old World's Fairgrounds in New York. Bill Graham had wanted the Doors for a return date at the Fillmore East, but the outdoor venue in Queens was 5 times larger and offered them billing with The Who, the British band that had just announced plans to do a rock opera called Tommy. The Doors were confident of an artistic and exciting evening. Morrison, 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 Morrison. Jim left the black limousine and he could hear the crowd chanting his name. His documentary crew was behind him, backing him up and trailing in his leather street-stud wake. His expression was relaxed as he moved slowly through a large throng of girls, then entered the backstage area where he was wrapped in a cloak of New York City cops. Morrison, Morrison, Morrison. His name was a mantra to the audience as they chanted the fairgrounds. His expression was solemn as he climbed the stairs of the stage. The cops took up positions in front of the stage and the cameraman, Paul and Babe, scrambled onto the stage behind him. Except for the buttons of light from the amplifiers and the glow of burning incense on Ray's organ, the stage was in darkness. Morrison, Morrison, Morrison. The other Doors was playing the intro to Backdoor Man. Jim arrived at the microphone, a spot went on and the audience exploded, and Jim filled the world with a long, pained, ear-piercing, Hitlerian scream. For a moment he stood motionless, then dropped to the ground, contorting and kicking like a spastic. In the hour that followed, Jim was a vision in a Mexican peon shirt and black leathers, whirling on one boot, collapsing in primal pain to rise again and grab his crotch with crooked hands, hopping forward, eyes closed and lips pursed in ecstasy. The kids in the audience began coming at the stage like bugs smashing into a radiator grill. The cops were forced onto the stage itself, where they formed a wall of short-sleeved blue shirts and dark blue pants between the Doors and their frenzied audience. No one could see. Jim was lay writhing on his side, his hands pushed between his thighs as he fell to the ground at the end of the end. The music was pounding. The kids began climbing over the backs of other kids, gaining and gripping on the stage, only to be grabbed by the cops and literally flung back into the darkness. Hundreds of wooden folding chairs were hauled at the cops. Hundreds of teenagers were laying down bleeding. The concert was ended abruptly, and that was riot number 2. In an era where rock riots were acquiring underground chic, this caused the newspaper headlines and the group reputation was enhanced. The momentum was still building. Let's read on a bit more. It was a steamy Friday night in New York City. The Doors were headlining the Singer Bowl and there was tension backstage. The Who, the hottest group in the world that summer, were angry they weren't headlining and demanded that the Doors gear not be on stage as they played their incendiary live show that ended in explosions and splinters guitars. During the Who set, the Singer Bowl's revolving stage malfunctioned, leaving a large part of the audience unable to see the performance, and they were extremely annoyed. But Jim rode to the show in a limo with Jack Holzman and Ellen Sanders, who wrote, "Morrison and the boys have grown apart. He was too crazy, too unreliable, too intellectual, too conceited, but mostly he was too insecure. They shunned him socially, and he retaliated by terrorizing them with the threat that he would quit the band. He was lonely, and as all writers must be, and he's often drank himself into creating a scene at concerts. He was also a rather pleasant guy when he wasn't acting out." On they rode to the gig. Jim flipped through the Village Voice and mumbled about how bored he was in New York. The driver got lost. "Fucking anarchy," Jim said. He started singing Eleanor Rigby. Santa told him that he was weird, and Jim replied, "I tries." In a traffic jam near the Singer Bowl, Jim opened a window of the limousine and let the mob, excited and groping him. "Would some of the chicks escort me backstage?" he said. "I might get mobbed or something." The backstage area was cramped and sterile. Checking the film crew was with him. Jim stepped out into the crowd and was surrounded by kids who seemed afraid to be getting too close to him. He signed a few autographs, then disappeared backstage. Pandemonium ensued when the Doors finally appeared after an hour's delay, ushered through the 15,000-strong crowd by a newly hired flax of black Philadelphia private detectives in stingy brim hat. Off-duty uniformed police repelled an instant assault on the stage, then formed a defensive perimeter. Jim had to push his way through the line of tough cops to get through and look at the crowd. "Cool down," he told them. "We're going to be here a long time." He preached to them, screamed, moaned, collapsed, and pussyfooted along the rim of the stage. The kids in the front tried to grab him, and the 20 cops on stage had to pry them away. Jim intercut familiar songs with long stretches of the Celebration of the Lizard and other snatches of surreal ad-lib poetry that mystify the restive Long Island teenagers. When the cops got rough with the kids up front, wooden seats flew onto the stage. Jim picked them up and threw them back into the convulsive crowd. The film crew kept shooting and tried to duck the flying debris. The last song of the night was The End. The kids who couldn't see were frustrated, upset and very loud, screaming, sit down, we can't see," at overwrought kids and teeny boppers standing on the chairs. "Shh," Jim whispered. "Hey everyone, this is serious now. Everyone, get quiet, man. We're gonna ruin this thing. Shh." He kept interrupting the familiar flow of the recorded version with poetic interjection. "Fall down now, strange gods are coming," and other improvisations. At one point he shrieked, as if in a nightmare, "Don't come here, don't come in." When he began the Oedipal verses, the audience were way ahead of him, yelling, "And as he walked on down the hall." Before Jim spoke the line himself, and when Jim got to the climatic mother question, hundreds of young girls screamed in terror as the band crashed into the finale. Jim collapsed on stage like he'd been shot, and the whole stadium exploded. Robbie Krieger finished his set in an electric, weird storm of reverb and feedback. Jim wasn't finished yet, though. As the show was ending, he went to the edge of the stage and made a negative connection with a young Hispanic couple he'd been eyeing down front through the whole gig. He looked at this big Puerto Rican guy and said, "Who's that Mexican slut you're with tonight, huh?" The guy picked up his seat and heaved it at Jim. That was the first seat thrown at the stage. The whole area erupted as dozens of chairs came flying through the hot, humid air. Jim kept dancing and laughing hysterically through the end. The cops tried to get him off the stage, but he lay down and they couldn't move him. Finally, the Afro-American bodyguards hustled the band towards the dressing room, and the cops fought with the kids, and a mini riot ensued with dozens of arrests and severe injuries, all reported in the papers the next day. The Doors road crew had to defend the amplifiers from being torn apart, and the crowd was cleared out. The Singer Bowl looked like a bomb had gone off. Pete Townsend, the Who's flamboyant intellectual lead guitarist, watched the wild drama from the side of the stage. He saw Jim watch him passively as the bodyguards roughed up kids who just wanted to get near him. He thought he had seen it all by then, but he was amazed by Jim Morrison's calculated escalation of the crowd's mood, from adoration to rapture to chaos, finally to violence. Townsend wrote the song Sally Simpson on Tommy soon afterwards about Jim as a backhand tribute to him. Backstage, as the film crew's camera rolled on, Jim comforted a teenage girl who'd hit him on the head by a flying chair. She was bleeding from the scalp wound and trying to stop, but Jim put his arm around her to cool her. "It's a democracy," Jim said soothingly, looking into the camera with a crooked smirk. "Someone hit her with the chair. There's no way to tell who did it, though." Tenderly, Jim wiped blood from her face. "It's already coagulating," he cooed. She was just an innocent bystander. When a groupie-looking chick sashayed by Jim in a red dress, he grabbed her and stuck his hand up her dress for the benefit of the cameras, and smiling broadly. Later he asked, "Do you think it looked phony, me talking to her like that?" And finally, about the Singer Bowl. The Doors are captured on film performing at the colossal Singer Bowl in New York on August 2nd, 1968. The Who opened the concert. When they came off stage, Townsend told Elektra publicist Danny Fields that the audience was real tense and ready to explode tonight. Fields hurried to tell the Doors. Morrison just looked at him as though he was a fool and said, "How can you tell?" The crowd was anxious, but the Doors had decided to take their time coming out. A full hour half passed and still no doors. By the time the audience was stomping and shouting, demanding them, finally the band were introduced and they began their musical vamp while waiting for Morrison. Jim deliberately took his time, already getting off on manipulating the crowd to relieve his boredom. When he did come out, he came with an entourage of security cops forming a wedge in front of him and behind him, completely hemming him in. But some of the girls from the audience still managed to grab him and kiss him and drag him into the thong. People leaped at him and tried to touch him and kiss him, but the cops got him safely to the stage. Morrison grabbed the mic and began to sing Backdoor Man in a croon. But as a good portion of the audience still couldn't see, they began shouting. Storming, as if further infuriate the angry crowd, the Doors stalled on stage, messing around between songs. And everywhere Jim went, the Doors film crew followed him all over the stage, trying to capture his every move. In the crowd, there was a mounting sense of hysteria. As Jim performed wildly to an aggressive audience, Paul Ferreira hides behind John Densmore's drums to shield himself and the camera from the audience projectiles. Jim can be seen leaping into the air and then having a fit on the ground as the New York cops watch him in astonishment. Not to Touch the Earth is now playing over the film's soundtrack on the movie Feast of Friends, which is where they used the Singer Ball footage in the movie. Jim Morrison spun around and ground the songs out, even ad-libbing and improvising while doing an ominous dance. Hysteria was building. Morrison began shrieking and moaning and minced the edge of the stage, hovering and calling one girl a Mexican whore who sucks my prick, which prompted her boyfriend to throw a chair at the stage. Morrison caught it and heaved it back into the crowd. Desperate hands reached out and grabbed at him as the cops pried them away. The Doors were hardly visible from any angle because there were about 20 cops on stage. Jim, however, does not share these concerns because he is now a master puppeteer and knows what he's doing. He recites evil poetry to confuse the audience. The crowd erupts during Light My Fire as the mob mentality reaches a fever pitch and Jim's enjoying watching the mayhem unravel. The teeny boppers are now standing on the chairs screaming, come here, at Jim. By the time Doors begin to perform the end, the crowd is in an incredible uproar. Morrison vainly attempts to shush the audience, but there is no response, and he begins appealing to them. Hey, this is serious, everyone. Get quiet, man. You're going to ruin this whole thing. Following the opening stanzas of the song, Morrison drifts into an expansive passage of poetry, beginning with Fall down now, strange gods are coming, and O keeper of the royal sperm, feed the king and the king will die. This last stanza made some of the crowd laugh. With decidedly steady pacing, he advances through a series of poems until he unexpectedly screams, don't come here, don't come in. Proceeding from his flare-up into Ensenada, Morrison is continually assailed with clamorous screams of Morrison is king! Morrison is king! From the crowd. He calmly begins to recite the Oedipal section of Mother, I want to, and the singer bowl bursts into a total pandemonium, with the audience finishing the lyrics in a cry from the pits of hell. The band accelerates into the final tribal musical passage. Come on, baby, take a chance with us. He can't stop now. He's lost himself in the moment. You gotta come on, baby, gotta ride on, you gotta ride on, baby. By now he's in a hypnotic state before he finally falls and hits the stage in an iconic acrobatic leap high into the air from John's drum riser, writhing in agony like the death knell of a hideous serpent as the crowd goes wild. The instrumental passage climaxes with a horrendous blood-calling scream from Morrison as he contorts on the floor as if he's having a massive epileptic seizure as the cops look down at him confused, following Krieger's guitar set on some wildly unrestrained echo feedback loop. By now, no one remains seated in the crowd, and the audience are forming a barricade in front of the stage. Now the audience is definitely screaming, sit down, cop, sit down. As Krieger finishes the song in a long trail of feedback, And just before midnight, as the Doors conclude their performance, a horde of people begin demolishing the wooden setting section in front of it, hurling portions of the splintered benches of the stage. The debacle turns into a complete riot by then, when the crowd charges the police barricades, forcing the Doors to abandon the stage amid a torrent of plummeting debris as the police struggle to regain control of the crowd. Vince Trenner and the equipment crew desperately try to defend their gear. Pete Townsend, the lead guitarist, is blown away.